Presence, the podcast for everyone interested in bodywork, embodiment, and somatic practices. I'm Andrew Rosenstock, your host and guide on this enlightening journey. With my expertise as a somatic movement therapist, yoga therapist, and certified rolfer, I'll merge clinical insight with real-world experience to enrich our discussions with our guests. Through engaging and informative talks, this podcast delves into mind-body paradigms, offering insights and strategies to empower personal growth. Your support is vital for our grassroots and lo-fi production. If you connect with our content, please leave a positive review and subscribe on your preferred platform. Your engagement helps us reach a broader audience and supports our mission. So thanks for tuning in today to Touching into Presence. Fasten your seatbelt as we embark on a journey to explore the transformative power of contemplative and somatic practices together. It was a pleasure to be in conversation today with Dr. Mark Olson. Mark holds an MA in education and a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Illinois, specializing in cognitive and behavioral neuropsychology and neuroanatomy. His research focused on memory, attention, eye movements, and aesthetic preferences. Dr. Olson is also a NARM practitioner, aquatic therapist, former massage school director, and published author on chronic pain and trauma-informed care. He offers a variety of courses at dr-olson.com that provide neuroscientific insights into the human experience and relational skills training for professionals and curious laypersons. In today's conversation, we explored how Mark's path weaves together neuroscience, bodywork, and a deep inquiry into what it means to touch, heal, and relate. We discussed how his early fascination with human behavior led him to neuroscience, and how a later immersion into massage revealed dimensions of psychological and relational change that traditional explanations couldn't fully capture. Mark shared insights on interoception, the role of C-tactile fibers in creating felt safety through human touch, and how neuroscience reframes concepts of trauma, posture, and therapeutic presence. Together we questioned common narratives around deep pressure, releasing trauma, and letting go, highlighting the need for more nuanced, embodied, and trauma-informed approaches. Mark's work offers a bridge between hard science and heartfelt presence, a call to understand the nervous system, not as a mechanical system to be fixed, but as a dynamic expression of relationship, history, and possibility. A thoughtful and integrative teacher, he invites us to move beyond surface models and into a richer, more compassionate way of seeing and supporting human experience. I'm excited to share his talk as I've been looking to have more talks on the subject of neuroscience, and this will hopefully be the first of many more to come. So with all that said, let's get into the talk.
Hey there.
Hey, Mark. I'm excited. I've been wanting to have a neuroscience on, and I've reached out to a few neuroscientists because I think it's such an important part of our work that is getting more talked about, but is not as talked about. And when we connected, I was like, hallelujah. So one of the things we talked about in our pre-call was maybe not diving too much into the origin story, but I do find like the brief of how you got bit by a radioactive spider to be helpful. So if it's cool, why don't I dive into a little bit about what brought Mark to become the neuroscientist that he is now, and especially about, body work, how that all connected.
Well, I studied neuroscience at the University of Illinois, and I did that because I was interested in what makes us human, what makes us think, behave, and feel the way we do. And I was not thinking about massage therapy at all, except that I thought, maybe someday I'd take some classes because it could be cool just to have as a side skill. So after I got a PhD, I did take some classes. I kept my promise to myself, and I instantly realized that I like it. I'd like to do more of it. And I just kind of immersed myself in the massage world. I ended up teaching lots of classes for massage schools. And the neuroscience and the massage kind of existed in two different realms for a while. And then I took some training. I took a lot of training actually in aquatic therapy. And through that, I don't know if you're familiar with aquatic bodywork at all, but I just found it to be this very powerful, beautiful method. And I noticed that there were a lot of things going on that don't fit the explanations that we give for what we're doing. Like a lot of psychological things were happening, and I think well, yeah, I could tell lots of stories about that. But anyway, so the um, that was the main aspect of it. There was wow, there's something more to this, and I'm well positioned to understand what that is. So let's figure that out. Let's put this together and explain like why this is not about muscles and tendons and how are we affecting psychology through these methods. So that's the short story of how I started to put them together.
Yeah, that's actually helpful. As I think humans do, I created a different story. I was like, because I knew you had a massage school in Hawaii, so I just figured, oh, Mark had a massage school and then wanted to get more into neuroscience, and so became a neuroscientist. And I completely had a fabrication, so I'm happy to hear that. And also, I agree with you. I studied. I had a teacher who taught aquatic body work, and have done some various like Watsu and Bio. I forget the German ones, Biodance or
There's so many different
yes,
ones.
yeah,
Water dance, yeah. Mhm.
what it, yeah. But I loved it, and the main reason I don't practice it is A, I'm 6'4", and finding the right pool for me is hard. And then B, I need to have a pool nearby that also, if it could be warm and salt water, I don't, or I'm not near a warm ocean. So
Yep.
I don't practice it much, but whenever I can, even if I'm just in a regular pool and I can get my wife and we're, just bring her in the water and, oh, it's so amazing.
Yeah, I think that's why most of us don't practice it for the and lack of ability to get to a pool that will work.
I worked at a place once that was in Thailand, and they had a pool, but it was designed for people like 5 feet, and it was I couldn't work in it. It was tiny. I mean, I couldn't even I could barely fit in it. It was kind of hilarious.
So
But
that's one of the funny things about that practice is that Harold Dahl, who was, started Watsu, was super tall, taller than you. But most of the people he was teaching, of course, were female and shorter. So, it's a not all the moves translated.
yeah, I do love it, especially just the from a bit of the neuroscience. The, there's so much safety by
Mm.
being in the water there that the table can't quite provide. That so much intro. I mean, we'll talk about interoception, but there's so much happening in that field that's filling your body in proprioceptive and various receptive awarenesses. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a bunch of areas I do want to get into, and there's so many we won't have enough time for all. But I know you're pretty amped, and I saw your recent writing about interoception. So if you want to just dive into interoception, I'm happy to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something that I realized recently that I'm super excited about, and I've never heard anyone really talk about it in this particular way. But you have to build it up a little bit in terms of the background. So, if you look at our nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, we have basically two types of fibers: A fibers and C fibers. And the A fibers are myelinated, so they send signals fast, and the C fibers are not myelinated, so they send signals slow. And all of our exteroceptive systems are using A fibers because we need to know about the environment right away in order to respond to it effectively. And all the signals from the inside of the body, the interoceptive signals, are running on C fibers. So you can think of it really clearly in terms of A for exteroceptive and C for interoceptive. But there's a few very interesting exceptions. One being temperature. Temperature is carried on C fibers. But I would say that that's just because we evolved in a situation where there was never a time where you needed to have a fast response to something too hot or too cold. Like if you're moving towards a fire, you could still feel it for a while. Your slow fibers were fine. We didn't have stoves. So stoves are this new thing where you could actually just touch it and be screwed. But other than that, we didn't really need to have fast fibers for temperature. But the really interesting piece is the C-tactile fibers. And I imagine you know about this. It's these fibers that respond to touch at a particular speed that we would call like a sensual speed or like an effleurage stroke in massage. Anything slower, anything faster, they don't respond. And those fibers, they're C fibers, they're not going to this metasensory cortex to tell you what the thing is or where it is. They go into the limbic system to create a positive feeling. And so what's really cool about it is that it's a C fiber, it's an interoceptive fiber, but what it's responding to is something external that can only be delivered by another human being. Because that touch is only going to happen if someone is there in a comforting, supportive way. So I just think that's a really special thing to notice, that the one thing that crosses that line into interoception from the outside is touch from another human being. I mean, I suppose your cat could do that too, or something like that. But mainly human beings. And and what do we do in massage? We utilize that. And I don't think I think that's a really profound evolutionary, anthropological, neuroscientific fact that we should promote more.
Mm. So it's what's interesting. I would have thought so. It's I guess classified as interoceptive because of the class of fiber it is. So even though it's an exterior signal, it becomes interoceptive wiring wise. Do I have that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to come along and say, no, we still consider that exteroceptive, they are welcome to let me know if that's the case. But I mean, we're talking about it's giving you a felt sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not telling the information that you're getting isn't about something external to you. Like that C fiber is not saying like what is happening. That's still coming in on the A fibers.
Mm-hmm.
But the sense that it's giving you is this good feeling. So that makes it interoceptive because it's about your felt sense.
Gotcha. I gotcha. So there's actually there are, and bear with my noviceness. There are two there because there's the A fiber going in that is saying sort of or helping inform what it is, and then there's the other information coming along with it, which is the felt sense, the pleasurable of it, and that's the interoceptive part of it.
Yeah, presumably, and this is just a guess because I don't think we've ever figured this out, but presumably if you could somehow turn off all the A fibers and then do an effleurage stroke, you would not know where you were being touched, but you would still feel good from it.
Mm.
Again, I don't know if that
Yeah,
really would happen, but that would be the theory.
it's interesting. It's a little bit different, but it ties a little bit into something I will be talking with my clients about, which is so this is more than this brings in other, I guess, perceptions, including cognitive, which is if they're lying on the table, so much of what's happening is built into their conceptual awareness of Andrew and how they view safety in relation to me and our therapeutic relationship. But that actually, if I had the joke is if I had a small person under the table that they didn't see, and that person was touching them, that they would actually be thinking Andrew is touching them, but in reality, there is another feel, another touch going on, but the brain would be making up a fact that it's because of what they can perceive, that the reality of what's happening and what they perceive as happening are not always the same thing. So it's slightly
Yeah.
different, but there's I'm liking that I can also now expand that into more of the A and the C fibers.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I'm glad that connects with that.
Well, it connects in. I mean, it connects a lot into, which is another thing we probably vibe into. Trauma informed is so popular these days; it's used all the time. I actually bought some trauma informed coffee earlier today.
Wow.
That's a joke. This is the joke on
Oh, okay.
on like how everything becomes a brand and the actual
Yeah.
content itself gets lost.
Hmm.
But that so much of trauma informed is actually conceptualization, how we make the world up. So that's where that sort of comes into it. And I think actually bringing in more of the neuroscience is really important because I'm in a trauma class right now, and there isn't a lot of neuroscience in it, unfortunately. And it's a lot of mythologies that are put upon mythologies, which are really, really great, but actually I think can be more trauma inducing than trauma informing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been my concern for a long time with the trauma-informed term, and I teach a class on trauma-informed care, so I am very much in favor of trauma-informed. At the same time, I'm very concerned about
Mm-hmm.
not teaching it enough. When like if you have a sophomore level understanding of things, you just know enough to be dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that is a concern that I have, that if not enough is taught, then I don't know if it's better to not have taught it at all, but we definitely have to be careful about opening up cans of worms, or teaching things in ways that are oversimplified and not really getting to the heart of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we're going to find that answer today. Although I think you and I are very aligned in that way, but it's a tricky thing. And yes, I think it is great that it's great that trauma the there's more awareness of it. That is super duper. And and this is where my joke was intended, hopefully not too offensive. When it becomes a brand or when it becomes a buzz, we're no longer really talking about the same thing. It
Mhm.
becomes a product. It becomes something we can sell. There's someone who works near where I work who's claiming to be both somatic and trauma informed. Interestingly, when they said that they were somatic, they just said it's just of the body, and I thought, well, that's actually not somatic. That's okay. And okay, you've now done your 20-hour trauma informed class. In some regard, this is great, but you actually can be, like you said, you can actually be more dangerous because you have just enough. And in fairness, I have been more dangerous. And when I look back at how I was working, which is part of the education process, with my more basic, I definitely thought I understood this huge aspect. And as I go deeper, but especially as I start to go more into the neuroscience, it's so important to me because it really starts to look at how things are firing and getting more of a sense of, well, that's great that we think we understand, but what's actually going on in the human organism in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm so glad you brought up that point about somatic and trauma informed, because I have kind of been swimming in that topic for a long time, of how, I actually just did a class last week on that very topic of how do those two things relate to each other, and to really point out that they're not the same. And in fact, you can definitely cause a lot of trouble by doing somatic things that aren't trauma informed. And a lot of things, especially older ideas, like 20th century ideas, a lot of those are not trauma informed somatic strategies.
I mean, I might get kickback for this, but I think a lot of I mean, as a rolfer, I'm allowed to call myself a rolfer. That's really it. But I would say a lot of the stories I would hear about some of the older forms of rolfing sounded to be trauma inducing. Uh, and yes, the person seemed to feel better afterwards. My concern is less about how they felt afterwards as much as what else was being done, what else was being. I sometimes talk about a metaphor of like a pressure cooker. Well, it's good when the pressure cooker goes off, but if there's a vacuum that's actually bringing more into it and is creating more pressure afterwards, which isn't being noticed, is that a good thing? How do you find a way to actually get the pressure out in a refined way that doesn't also bring more back in? And so I hear you on a lot of the older ways, but also not to poop on them because we're figuring stuff out constantly.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of who came before us. So we have
yeah,
to, whatever their mistakes were, they were critical part of the process.
yeah, and
We'll be,
grateful.
yeah, we'll make
Yeah,
mistakes too, and the next generation will benefit from ours.
yeah. Hopefully. I mean, I know you and I are flawless, flawless.
Right, right. No, I was talking about everybody else, of
Everyone else,
course.
exactly. Yes. if there's more you want to share about interoception, if there's more, I just want to like hear you talk and share because you have so much um, knowledge, and I do find this stuff really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one thing when I'd written to you that I wanted to mention because I just thought that was such a neat piece that I hadn't heard about. I mean, we could talk about interception all day. I just actually put together a class on it that I've been wanting to put together for a long time. So I'm very excited about it. At the same time, sure there's tons of topics we could go off on. I'll say one more thing about the somatic piece is that
Mhm.
when I was running a massage school in Hawaii. Uh, I took that school. I became the director of that school because I really liked how they integrated mind and body. They were doing
Mhm.
really great things, and I also noticed that some of the things that were being done were ultimately I understood them to become dysregulating, and I thought, well, why? Why? What's going on here? It seems like these are really great things that we're doing, and I eventually trained in the neuroaffective relational model of developmental trauma, and that's a model for psychotherapists. And I realized, oh, there's all these things that we're integrating here that are re-traumatizing, and maybe they're great for some people, but they're not great for some with early childhood trauma. And I mean, I started teaching classes on it because I just thought it was so important for people to realize that there's a whole realm of things within massage that if we don't realize, we're really opening cans of worms without even trying to.
Mm. So what was it? Because you said there was something you liked about. What was it about in particular about that?
About the school,
Mhm.
well, I'm teaching at lots of different schools, and most of them, I would say, were very kind of like normal schools. I mean, there's a wide range of different kinds of schools, but they all have distinct flavor. Some are more um, clinical, I might say, or some of them are more woo woo. uh, and this was neither really. This was based on structural integration, actually,
Mm.
um, and but it was also there was a whole transpersonal element to it. So there's a huge focus on presence and awareness. And so that's what I really liked about it. And I wanted to come in and like, let's do this together. Let's integrate the neuroscience into it. That'll be really awesome. Which is ultimately what happened. But at the same time, it was coming from structural integration, which had this long history of fascia being the central thing. And so
Mhm.
I had to add in the trauma informed piece, and I had to take out the fascia
Mm.
piece in the way that it was being presented. So, you know, I mean, anyone we can go off on either of those topics, but
Well, yeah. How was that? How was that received at first? Because I know in my community or one of my communities, some people are really, yeah, they're holding on strong.
yeah,
Identity is hard to shed.
yes, and we see that in politics too.
Yeah.
Um, so, well, I can say that whenever I started teaching things from a neuroscientific lens, as the central piece, and saying, hey, it's not about these tissues as much as you think it is. Everyone just said, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense." When I explained, "Hey, this is what you would have gotten before," we would have told you that it was about moving fascia around in a permanent way. I mean, they would just easily said, "Well, that doesn't make any sense." Um, but the folks who were trained the other way, the previous way, yeah, I think it was kind of like an act of blasphemy that I was conducting, maybe in some of their minds. Uh, and yeah, I don't think they liked it, but
Yeah, I don't think they still like it. It's a thing that's still in the community for sure. And I
yeah.
mean, it makes sense. I mean, there's a great story about Dr. Rolf. There's so many, her aphorisms are so great, but they said like one day they saw her, short, and one day someone saw her angry and they said, Dr. Rolf, why are you so angry? And she said, they say old lady Rolf only cares about the body. It's not true. It's just all I can get my hands on.
Ah,
You know,
that's
yeah, it was clear it wasn't just that, but what I sometimes would joke with is say humans are so simple that we always confuse what we see with what it is, and not realizing that there's so much more in that. And so we live in this external material world without looking what's underneath the hood, what's driving it. As I start to understand more about pain science, thanks in part to our mutual friend Michael Pollan, but then moving through and getting into the gamut, I remember thinking, like, because I definitely thought fascia, tissues, all that, and then I started to really think, what's causing the tissues to do that? And yes, scar tissue and adhesions and all that are definitely a part of it, but when when the client moves their arm, why is it, first of all, two clients move their arm differently? If it's not just fascia, like, and so getting more into that, of which there is a branch of Rolf movement that I think looks at a lot of that. But again, getting into what's actually happening in that sensory-motor cortex, in the cerebellum, if the body is primed to be on the lookout because it didn't have a safe environment at a younger age, well, then before we even dive into what's happening on this like tissue, what's the foundation out of the processes of that? You can hammer away all day. The signaling isn't going to necessarily change underneath that because it's been primed in a way. You have to go and work with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know if you saw a recent article I wrote about how the usual model is kind of boring, the way we look at things. And I mean, I just think that what we're doing is so profound, really. And I think we all know that, even though, yeah, so we know that it's profound, we feel how profound it is, and then we give these explanations that don't do it justice. Uh, but yeah, it's hard to give explanations that do it justice because it's too complicated. It's way easier to describe things in terms of matter,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking in terms of rubber bands and blocks like we use as kids, like
Mm-hmm.
that's what we base our understanding of reality on, rather than complex neural systems.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. Even I was thinking there are some people who maybe 20 minutes ago when they heard A fibers and C fibers are already saying, "Well, I don't." It's that because it is. I like to make jokes if it's not obvious to you or my listeners, but a joke I make to my clients and to myself and my wife is that everything is challenging until it isn't.
Mm.
Everything is difficult until it isn't. So things are really difficult until we start to understand it, which takes that effort. Once we start to learn a little bit more of it, it actually isn't that complicated. But until we get there, yeah, it's, oh my god, and it's just easier to say, well, I don't want to put the time in or the effort, and this works good enough, and again, I'm comfortable in that, so that's fine. I can ignore all the other stuff. um,
Definitely, a lot of things definitely work good enough. That's for sure. We definitely, thank goodness we don't have to actually fully understand things in order to do good work.
And thank God as well, people like you are like, well, that there is that, but I do want to understand more, and I do want to push things forward, or maybe not push, but move things forward, because that is, in my world at least, ideally what civilization is about. Is about, okay, how, if we can enhance, refine, improve, how do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's why we're having these discussions and hopefully moving the needle little by little,
Yeah,
right? Even in
yeah.
our mistakes, we move the needles.
Uh, so I know you mentioned it briefly, and there will be probably a link if there is one for, yeah, you are, like, you had a school, you don't have a school anymore as much. Well, you don't have a school in Hawaii anymore. You now have moved, I think, more online.
Hmm.
You're also teaching. Are you teaching in person as well?
Yeah, I'll teach in person. I don't have anything particularly scheduled in person, but I would love I love teaching in person. But right now I'm just teaching online to, yeah, to do that.
Mm-hmm. And are you, do you have it that you have, I should have done more research, but here we are, that you like, do you have, how do I say this? Like, people can subscribe to you. You've created basically programs, and people subscribe to that, or are you doing live stuff as well?
Yeah, no, I have the on-demand classes people could take, on their own time, and I also have live courses. These are courses on trauma-informed care and classes on uh, pain and neuroscience and bodywork. I have a lot more on-demand courses at this
Mhm.
point, but on interoception and perception and just neural systems, lots of different things. The interoception class will be out soon. Uh, but yeah, any of those things I could also teach live if somebody wanted it. I don't have like a tour or anything.
Not yet, not yet. But we'll put a link where people can, because again, without hitting it too much home, I think that the more that we can start to understand about what's happening under the hood, the more change we can affect. I know for me, um, I started to, in some way, do less and get more results back. And in rolfing, I don't think this is much, but in massage, a common thing I would hear about is like a 3 to 5 year term of life for the practitioner. It was common for people to do massage and not make it more than 3 or 5 years before burning out or getting injured.
Hmm.
And this is just what had read in massage magazines of talking to people. So just thinking, well, if they understood more about neuroscience, they get two. Actually, I'm thinking right now of uh, a client of mine referred her massage practitioner who was stuck in a grief loop and was in chronic pain and couldn't understand how, she couldn't understand how anything was going on because her model of massage didn't actually include anything about that. And therefore, because she had no awareness of it, it didn't actually exist. I couldn't even work on her more. I mean, I couldn't, as soon as I would even get close to touching her body would just shut down in my hands. And she kept wanting me to push harder and harder. And I was thinking, but every time I do that, you're gripping harder and harder. I couldn't, I couldn't connect to her because it wasn't in her scope. And I'm thinking that if more massage knew this, two things, not just about how they can affect their clients better, but how they can have more awareness of themselves. And I know many people who get into this practice want nothing to do with themselves. They only want to do to other people. But I think it's very important that that the more again they can understand, there's so much more information. And again, it saves energy long term.
Right. Indeed. Yeah. I think the topic of like deep tissue or whatever you want to call it, it's an interesting one because it's everybody. So many people are all thumbs up about pressure and that kind of thing, and then maybe at the same are also talking about dissociative experiences. And I don't feel like those two conversations are meeting.
Oh.
And it seems like they should be
Mm-hmm.
because if you have early childhood trauma in one of your, or that doesn't have to be early childhood trauma, just any trauma that leads to, dissociated states
Mm-hmm.
where it's very adaptive to actually not be in touch with your feelings and your body.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? You're also going to be, one part of you is still going to say, hey, I want to feel something. You want to feel
Mm-hmm.
alive. And those people, I would imagine, are asking for more pressure because
Mm-hmm.
they don't feel as much. Now, I don't have a study that demonstrates that, but I think that that's something that we should be thinking about. And if someone is saying it's not deep enough, it's not deep enough, well, maybe they don't know that it's not about tissue, but we
Mm-hmm.
should know that it's not about the tissue. We should know that this might be related to this, trauma strategy to
Mm-hmm.
so we're
Yeah.
not going to get anywhere by pushing
No.
on it and to maybe make things worse on a physiological level.
Well, from a business level, we'll get somewhere. They'll keep coming back.
Yeah,
It's a joke.
maybe. Yep.
I mean, maybe. No, no. I mean, I have a few colleagues who I refer to for that when I have clients who just want that, and because I recognize it doesn't matter how much I can try to educate you, become aware of that. That's not what they want.
Yeah.
Um, and getting, giving. I mean, I sometimes say getting what I want is the surest way to never get better. but
Yeah.
that's me. A lot of people want to stick with it, and there's been a narrative or a paradigm of deep tissue, in numerous cultures for many years. Again, largely because we can feel it,
Mhm.
or we can perceive this thing, and we can't necessarily perceive what's going on underneath per se, at least in the moment. Uh, some obviously can. When for those who are more like one of my practices is biodynamic cranial, so there are some people who can just walk in the room and feel the tidal phenomena that are arising. So they may not need to be pushed; they can just connect into it. Or someone who's been meditating for a long time can, but most of us can't. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a, I mean, I agree that you should still, I mean, if the client wants, that's their choice.
mhm.
I'm not saying
Oh yeah, I'm
that
not
is
hearing you. But I'm not
what
hearing
they
you.
need, but,
Yeah.
but I just think that we should have that in our back of our minds as maybe this is what's going on,
Mhm.
and, get out of this, well, maybe I'm not good enough that I can't provide enough pressure. That's just that we know that shouldn't be a thought in our heads.
Yeah. Well, I'm also one of the things I like. Again, Dr. Rolf had a saying. She said, we're educators. Now, that can be taken a lot of different ways, but I see it so much, especially within the Rolf movement way, is what I'm not necessarily coming to give people what they want, because again, that if what we do aligns is what they want, it's awesome. It's great. I'm coming here to get them what's underneath what they're aware of. Because again, if they knew what they wanted, if they knew what they needed, they'd be good. You could do it. And so it's so much for me about how do we start to educate into what are we feeling? What are what patterns are we moving in? How is that all happening? What I find is, I don't know, 80% of the people I meet with want that. And a lot still just want pressure. And, that's how it is. To have an epistemic shift, which is what we're talking about, we have
Yeah,
to have a huge shift. That takes in some way time, and we have to remember, without getting too conspiracy theory, there are a lot of big businesses that are built on the model that pain is good. And so why would they want to? I mean, in some regard, why would massage? I think this is probably somewhere where I'm going to guess you come up against is like, why would massage and or massage practitioners want to change? Like they're getting, this is their livelihood, this is their industry.
indeed. Yeah. I mean, can't argue with that. That's for sure. Well, I think one thing that I could share that I think is useful for that shift
Mhm.
to occur is the way that we think about posture, and I'm curious what your thoughts will be on this. Because posture usually, has this very boring approach of let's just get symmetrical and then everything will be fine, even though the research clearly demonstrates that's not true. But we know it's a very appealing idea that we like symmetry and beauty in that, and it makes sense from like an engineering perspective. So we like that too. But I think about how posture is so psychological.
Mhm.
And we know that if you're sad, you're gonna have a different posture. You're gonna show a different posture than if you're excited or whatever. Everybody knows that. But what I think most of us aren't recognizing is that we show up with postures to block the feelings that we don't want to feel. Not just here's how I feel, let me show it to you, but here's what I'm feeling, and I'm gonna hide it from you
Mhm.
and myself by putting on this other posture. Like I could, if I started to cry right now, I could make myself stop crying by changing my posture.
Mhm.
Or I could do that for the rest of my life
Mhm.
and have a whole other posture. So I think a lot of times people get on the table and they think, oh, they had this transformation because something came up during the massage. And I said, well, maybe what's happening is that during those sessions, it's the one time they're not putting that posture on to block that awareness. And so now it's the only time when they're awake when they aren't doing that, and it's not conscious, of course. it's a subconscious mechanism. But I think if we start thinking about posture in this way, it's so much more sophisticated and complex and holistic.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
ever think about that as a rolfer?
yeah. There was a former Rolf instructor named Hubert Godard. I don't know if you've heard of his name. I mean, I don't think he was known really outside of our community. But there was there's so much mythology passed on. There was a story I had been told that he had said. Uh, the way that I understood it was like scoliosis. Like when you're looking at scoliosis, you're looking at like what 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 came in, what phenomena came in that the body built around it, and so that posture is building around um, different experiential markers. Now, that might be a something in terms of how the bones are taught to grow, but a lot of times it would be a small injury here, a protective here, a gripping here, a fearful thing here, so that the posture is forming around the lived experience, which is what I hear you're sort of saying as well too. That we, I mean, when I teach posture classes or workshops or even just with clients, I'll even say that the word has numerous ways of looking at it. One is when somebody is posturing, they are pretending to be a certain way, that we develop this way of standing in the world or being in the world. And so what I'm attempting to do is to find out, well, what is underneath that? How do we remove the barriers that were serving in various ways, but may be vestiges of an older time that no longer serves us?
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of what you're saying as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think like explaining it that way is different than people saying things like, "Oh, I just released trauma,"
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
which is what you hear a lot when I think these experiences are happening. You know, the trauma didn't just go away. It can't just go away,
Mhm.
right? So those explanations are, they need a lot of work. And
Mm.
I think this is part of helping understand how that relates to trauma and how, just in the psychology in general, like you were saying.
But remember, if something went away, it's not there. Therefore, we don't actually have to look at it. It's gone, even though it's right here.
Mhm.
I don't see it. It's gone. Yeah, I remember there was a few things on your notes that I loved. I was like, oh, we're speaking the same language, and it was release and then letting go.
Mhm.
And this is something I find uh, endemic in our in and it's partly again because it's romantic. There's something very romantic about, oh, I release it, or um, I let it, oh, I let it, or just let it go. I remember when I first saw Frozen, and I thought, this is this is dangerous for kids. You're basically teaching them when they get angry to ignore it. You say, don't just let it go. Don't actually make sense of it. Don't process it. Just let it go. And it's the challenge of language, but letting it go. I don't think that is the helpful way of looking at things. Although I understand why it's people say it, and I understand what they believe they mean, but
Mhm.
no, letting go is not necessarily helpful. Holding on is not helpful either.
Yeah.
Um, releasing. Well, how do you even know you released it if you don't even know where and how it is? No, it's so for me, it's a buzzword again, but processing or because I have contemplative practices, I might say being with. How do and of course, I'm not saying, hey, you've had trauma, just go sit with it. If that would be
Right.
not what I mean, but learning other ways of sitting with it 0.00001%, uh, and slowly over time finding other ways of being with it.
Indeed. Yeah. It's so hard to put the words to it, right? Because there's a tendency to be binary about it. It's either holding on or letting go.
Mm-hmm.
It's either there or not there.
Mm.
And It's the nuances in between are don't fit into sound bites very nicely.
No. I was listening to a talk by Alan Watts, and when I got into, we'll say, the bodywork world through yoga. Yoga was my first way in, and what was a common phrase was to surrender, and it made sense to me, but it also didn't make sense to me because I just pictured like waving a white flag, and so there was something about surrender to me that just seemed giving up. And Alan Watts, in one of his talks, mentioned the passive form of surrender is allowing. And it was just like my head blew up. Oh, of course. Don't fight, don't surrender. And this is what the Wu Wei has talked about. This is what all these things have talked about. But again, it doesn't matter how much we understand it mentally. There's some other feeling where it just, there it is. I get it. And the words won't help.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
I'd be curious. I don't know if there is this, but I'd be curious about the neuroscience of that, of how do we get to that, or what that is. I know there are, and this might be out of your area. I have a colleague or a friend who is very into studying the neuroscience of meditation, but I'm pretty sure they're just studying cortical frameworks. I don't know if they're doing subcortical frameworks, and I think that's where a lot of the juice lies.
Yeah. I mean, it's that was one of the things that I wanted to study, and I actually had an opportunity to study the neuroscience of transcendental meditation.
Mm.
And some folks are very enthusiastic about the particular kinds that they do, and only the particular kinds that they do, which seems sort of contrary to the whole point to me. But so that was the idea. That was kind of the offer that I had, was to study meditation, but only TM. And I'm like, no, these are all interesting. Well, I wouldn't want to just study one kind.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, in fact, it's kind of odd that we even give it the same name, because they're all so different what they're doing. That we're using different cortical areas. I mean, Vipassana meditation is focused on the body. It's focused on these sensations, and then allowing, right? Just being with those sensations and not trying to change them. That's very different than TM.
Theoretically, that's what it is. There's a lot of the practitioners in the schools. In theory, yes, that's what they're doing.
No, I hear you. We could go off on that too, right? But it's just I think a lot of people don't even realize that the word meditation means radically different things. If someone says, "Well, what is neuroscience teaching us about meditation?" Like, well, what type are you talking about? You got to look at different cortical regions. The Vipassana is going to be all about the insula and ventral medial, prefrontal cortex. These self regions, these body regions. But TM, you're imagining sounds in that don't have any language element to them. It's a similar focus with focusing attention. So you're going to use some of the same prefrontal regions, but it's just a different skill. It's like comparing volleyball to bowling.
Well, I think, and this is something my beliefs are around, is that what partly has happened is actually meditation is the same across all those. What's different is the technique, and so what's happened is people say transcendental meditation. What they really mean is transcendental mindfulness, and that all of those practices are mindful practices, which what I sometimes would say lead to the doorway, which is meditation. The problem is people are walking around with a doorway and saying, "This is my house of meditation." And no, you have a doorway that leads you into that, but you're just holding onto the doorway. You don't actually have the house. I haven't studied all of those, but I believe that what they're all pointing to is meditation. But they've used the word, which is the pointer, not the thing itself. And so that all of those are mindful techniques that, yes, are using different parts of the cortex. And as far as I have experienced, when we're in that state of absorbed bliss, whatever terms of meditation, of beingness, of flow. And this is what I'm really curious with the neuroscience. Well, what is going on there? What has happened that we have switched out of this more cortical way into this other way?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's always hard to mix neuroscience language with
Mm-hmm.
experience, like subjective experience, right? There's always this infinite chasm between these two worlds, even though we like to use the former to study the latter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so even if, we figure out what's going on, we still know what's going on
Yeah.
in some sense. So I don't have good answers for you as much as I would love to.
Well, I disagree. I think that is a good answer. I mean, I think that's the answer, at least for now. And so you have a great answer. You just might not have an answer that, and it's not the one I want, but I think what people are looking for. But actually, I think your answer is pretty spot on. Um, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there are things, one could say about self and other, where self is a process, like selfing. Sometimes, we talk about that in neuroscience as let's not think about a self as a noun, but think of it as a process
Mm-hmm.
verb. Like, and we're doing it all the time using our sense modalities. And if one of those sense modalities is giving us poor input, then interesting
Mm-hmm.
things happen, right? And we can do that intentionally by getting in, tanks with salt water and turning the lights off and then see what happens, right? But if and we can do, rubber hand experiments and other really cool things that change the input. So what seems like a stable self actually destabilizes very quickly if you take the sensory inputs away, or if they don't align with each other very well, and especially if you take the interoceptive inputs away, then so I think a lot of meditation practices are fiddling with that sensory input, and you see what happens, and so one of the processes is like deciding what's me and what's not me, and if you just give it poor input, it becomes difficult to make that distinction, and for some people that the conclusion is, well, I'm everything, or everything is me, or so.
No, I think you hit a really great point, which is about input, which again is that so much of us, what is our, or at least my work, and I think a lot of what you're also doing is there's no bad input. There's just learned input. There's just learned input that at some point had a value of helpful in some way. And now we have data traveling through that's coming in sensorialness, but also having a labeling of it from something else. And those are not exactly the same, but there's some processing happening that is keeping us alive. So that's great, but could be different. And if we can start to refine and enhance or clear out what we call poor processing or poor input, we can have a more healthy, optimal functioning.
Mhm.
And would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I should just clarify, we might be talking about a different thing when you say poor processing, because I'm thinking about like when you're in a sensory deprivation chamber, you have poor input,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting much about what's me and what's not me, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm just saying I think
Different.
we're
Yes, I hear what you're saying. So you're saying it's poor input because there's less input, or there's like, in the sensory deprivation take, there's no light, right? Or there's the absence of more or less everything. Ideally, the water is the level of the skin, so there's no real, theoretically, not much feeling happening.
yeah, or if you're just lying still,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't give you a lot of proprioceptive input, doesn't give you a lot of tactile input. So if you sit next to a fan long enough, that
Mm-hmm.
white noise, you'll start to hear voices, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you sit in the dark long enough, you'll start to see colors and shapes.
Mm-hmm.
So things start to get made up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And same idea with tactile input or proprioceptive input. If you give it not really great data to work with, it'll start to make things up. And
So I think that also. So what is it that? Where does the making up happen?
in the brain, because it's doing top-down processing. So you have the bottom-up signals, and then you have the top-down, which is based on prior knowledge. So you're going to see bunnies in clouds because you're familiar with bunnies. But if you've never seen a bunny before, you're not going to see a bunny in a cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's you're going to hear voices and fans because voices are important for humans. So all these like prior knowledge, who I am,
Mm-hmm.
are going to start coming into play when there's a question about the selfing process.
Yes, I think that is how it ties back in. Is that the data is poor coming in, and then it's meeting this, as I understand it, more the cortical part of the brain that's then creating information from poor data or lack of poor data, which would just be still poor data. And so there's something in that area where input or lack of input comes in that we are then creating this meaning or understanding of something in it. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So able to tie it back in. Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, in some regard, that is a meta way of saying, but that's what we're trying to do here, at least with Mark's classes, is to bring more up to date, refined data, saying, well, this is what we know now. We understand that this is what we knew before. Now we can clear that up, and when we clear that up, there's more power in realization and recognition that wasn't there before, which is also a challenge because many people, I should say, don't want to actually give up their beliefs because it is tied into their identity, and so we spin around and around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I'm with you now. Yeah.
Yeah. How about that? Yeah, I don't know if anybody else listening is with us, but you're with me and I'm with me. Now, this is in some way very helpful for me to get a better sense of refinement, and that's my hope, is that people listening get a little bit more refinement as well. Whether it's the same as mine, or they can just sort of say, "Oh, okay, I see the importance," or I get why that was. I just get to feel in real time, which is cool. I'm okay with that, and hopefully the people can learn from that, from my erroneous errors. But they can also take your class and learn more with that. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, all the above.
Yeah. For time's sake, both in terms of, I do think we could, and maybe we will, like, vibe for hours. There's so much here, but I want to be mindful of, is there a specific or a few other like things or anything where that we haven't got into that also is like, share this?
Well, I don't know how much time we have, so I don't know if we want to open up any other topics. I think we did a great job of touching on a number of things, and one thought I had earlier was what you said about Ida Rolf, and when she was the piece about just being about the body and putting her hands on. I mean, of course, she was interested in more about the body. She was hanging out at Esalen, like that's what they were doing. They were,
yeah, but she I don't think she intentionally went there at first. She was brought there, and then so I don't know if you know like the history of how she got to Esalen.
I don't know that particular history now.
Yeah, I can share with you quickly if you want, but I don't have to.
Yeah.
She was somebody had. So as far as I understand, I might have to date a little bit off. I think it was someone who was a student of Fritz Perls, who was like the person who really did Gestalt therapy. I think had said, you got to come and meet Fritz, because Fritz was teaching in Esalen, but he had I think chronic angina or something, and so she had worked with him. And just after one session, he said, "This is great, and everybody who's doing my program needs to do this." And so that's sort of how she came to Esalen and
Wow.
became a part of that. But I don't know. She was interested. She was studying, and she was involved, I think, loosely with the Theosophical Society, maybe not directly to them, but corollary. She'd been studying with this yogi in the 30s. She was been working with osteopaths, and so she had been involved in and around a lot of the more spiritual, but her background was also in biochemistry. She had a PhD in that. I think Esalen was really more a way that she was able to expand what she had been doing, and it was sort of like, you want to spread this more? Here you go. Here's a platform, and who wouldn't take that up?
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you shared that. That's an important part of the puzzle for the story. Yeah.
Yeah. But was there more you were going to say? Were you just going to say more just like that she's interested because she was at Esalen? That's what was happening then and there?
Yeah, I mean, because I'm saying that there's a lot of interesting elements psychologically in
Mm-hmm.
body work, and folks at Esalen were exploring that, and so I mean, if that's how she got started there, maybe it wasn't connecting in that way, but um, it was making sense to me that those things to go together.
And I would imagine they would overlap, and things would be being put into her her realm that was happening there. Especially at that time, there was so many, um, and even I think even before she came in, the first book that I know of that really wrote about body and mind came out of Esalen, which was called Body Mind, which was Ken Dykewald's book, which was, I think he wrote it in the late '60s when and part of that was being at Esalen that I think opened him up more.
Yeah, I didn't have anywhere else to go with the so, and I don't know how much time we have, so I'm not sure what doors to open.
I'm okay to call it now just because I've already had a lot,
Mhm.
and the titration process for listeners will probably be important. I
Yeah,
can, in my mind, see a few people like going back to their notebooks saying, "What was going through the notes?" Because again, it is. I think it's because I'm not as versed in it as you are, but it is things that we are passionate and familiar about. It is maybe easier to spit back and forth. They're not necessarily easy concepts to
right.
quick it down. So I'm happy to sort of end it there. I want to share one quick story, which I think you'll appreciate because I like stories. And I forget if I told you this in our pre-call, but I had a client come who was a neuroscientist from Harvard, and she was coming, I guess, for trauma in a way, and but body. And oh, you're a neuroscientist. Do you have more of a background in neurobiology or neurophilosophy? And she said neurobiology. And I said, oh, if it was neurophilosophy, this would probably work a bit better, but we'll see. And it was almost impossible to work with her
Right.
because that and I found that people who have that like I don't know, I like a lot of neuroscientists who have that neurophilosophy. I just think it opens, it's not anti-biology, but it just opens up this sort of inquisitiveness. And there was just something I remember saying, well, what we're working with may not necessarily ever be defined by biology or by science. And she said, it will, we just haven't done it yet. And it was that strong conviction. I was sort of thinking, well, how am I going to help you get free from something that may not be there? I'm not saying it is, but I wasn't able to, because everything kept coming down to the wiring only or this and that, and I was trying to say, well, there's this whole other thing that's happening as well that's interlaid together, but I couldn't do anything.
Yeah. Oh, I agree that it's good to spend time with neurophilosophers. I mean, Dennett's my hero. Sapolsky's my hero, and Oliver Sacks and those guys. Uh, I remember sitting in a neurophilosophy class in graduate school, going over Dennett's book on consciousness, and the instructor would ask us a question related to the to the book, and everybody in this class were like the top thinkers in the university on these topics. Professors and and graduate students. And she would just ask the question, and we would just sit there for many, many, many minutes in complete silence and then not know what the answer is. And I like that, where we we don't really know the
Yeah.
answers. It's really too hard.
Well, I think both serve a purpose, and what I like about you is the ability to be with both. I think that's really, really important. It's what I think makes you a good educator as well.
Yeah, it's important to know what you don't know and to know what you do.
Yeah. Well, with that, I know that I need to get ready for my next client. Grateful for this conversation. I do hope to have more
Yeah.
as our schedules allow and private correspondence. I'm happy for this new connection.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and
Much.
we'll put a link. I'll put a link to your site, but you can also share it here so that people can hear it. How do people find more about Dr. Mark?
My website is drolson.com. That's dr-olson.com.
And all your courses you can find there, I presume.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Super.
Thanks so much.
And my pleasure. And just wish you a great day out there and enjoy your Florida weather.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Mark at dr-olson, that's olson.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching into Presence. Bye for now.